Hi, my name is Anshuman. Today I'm joined by my two other group members, Sumantra and Kush, and today we've decided to do a 2D platformer game for our final 2250 project. Starting off with game design, we've implemented countless object-oriented practices in our code throughout our classes, such that it makes it easier for future expansion on game features and uh, fixes. For players, we have added the necessary Unity components to the inspector, and as such, all the scripts needed for physics and other game elements such as attack, uh, damage taken, and movement. For camera, we've added a follow cam to the player, and that also it dampens its movement depending on look ahead, where the player could end up depending on its movement and current velocity. That also hand in hand interacts with the parallax effect script, adding a bit more dynamic uh, flair to the background. For levels, we've added four levels. Each one is unique by its tile map and enemy layout. For enemies, each has a unique detection for the player and the way it attacks. And for user interface, we have uh, simple bars that convey the amount of health each enemy, and the player has. Going more into the classes, we've added many for every possible game feature needed, such as movement, enemy detections, uh, and specific enemy classes, health bars, scores, transitions, and name yeah, and you name it. We've also added many. Uh, we've also added a lot of inheritance-based uh, code, such that it makes adding new uh, enemy instances with different attributes a breeze by having common classes shared, reducing code. For polymorphism, I've we've added setters and getters to many fields, such that it makes it very easy to access private uh, fields for each class, also showcasing encapsulation.
So our game has implemented four levels where the player interacts with the world, enemy obstacles, and must platform throughout the terrain to reach the end of the level. Each of the tile maps in each of the levels are unique and utilize different assets. The player must be able to defeat or kill all the enemies in each of the levels to continue to the next level. In the first level, the player starts off in the first world of the game. The hero embarks on a quest to kill the Demon King and must overcome all the challenges in his journey. When the player is dropped into the map, he must practice by attacking and killing these flying enemies. And the enemies in this first level aren't as difficult and are much more easier than the upcoming levels, so they won't attack back on the player. For the second level, the player is traveling through a dark forest map where he encounters the ruins of the underworld. He will be swarmed by a variety of knights, which are a different style of enemy or a second style of enemy, and must kill all these knights and platform from each platform to the next to kill each knight. For the third level, we are now in a dark. We must traverse the dark lands in the clouds. The player will eventually get stronger in each of the levels by by getting by getting more by becoming able to do more damage to the enemies. Here we are faced by more platforming challenges, as you can see in the pictures, where the enemy or where the player will have to platform throughout the level and defeat more enemies. Once the player defeats all the enemies in this level, they will be teleported or transported to the fourth level, which is the final level of this game. In the final level, it is set in the underworld. Here, the the player will have to again do more parkour and do more platforming to defeat the knights, and will have to defeat the final boss fight, which is the Demon King or the King of the Knights, who has much more health and can do much more damage. So the player will have to strategically fight him to be able to defeat him and complete the game. The player has a certain amount of health in each level, and will must keep must this must they must keep track of it, as you can see on the top left corner. As when the player reaches zero, the player will die, and you'll have to restart the game.
We have the player. We created the player using capsule colliders instead of box colliders, as there was an error where we faced using box colliders. The bottom of the collider and the top of the floor were causing the player to clip and to glitch out. We implemented animations with the player, and for every state that the player is in, it has a different animation. For example, if the player is standing still, it'll bob up and down to show that it is still alive or like the game is playing. And another example is when you swing your sword, or if you want to attack something, there's a swinging sword animation. So it's more interactive that way, that you know that you're attacking something. Next are the detection zones. Every player instance has a detection zone that enables it to attack enemies. So if an enemy is around the player at a certain distance, you'll be able to click on your mouse and attack the enemy, as long as the enemy is in front of, or as long as your player is looking at the enemy. Talking about enemies, here they are. Um, so enemies are similar to the players. They have a similar amount of health, except you can't control them, obviously. Um, they will attack you if you move close to them because they have detection zones as well. On top of that, they also have edge detections, which some enemies in our game are on platforms. So we made an edge detection script where if an enemy is close to the ledge of a platform, it won't fall off and it'll turn around and move the other way. Ansh, do you want to talk about the camera?
Yep. So for the camera, it is using a module by the Unity library that allows us to follow a game object. In this case, that is the prefab for the player, and as per the movement from the touching direction script and the player controller script, the camera is then being uh, locked in to that game object, and depending on its current velocity vector, it can also look ahead, which basically means preemptively set a position for the camera to be at, by with of course a certain smoothing effect so that it's not that jarring, so that the player is ready for any enemies that could be in the new section of the map. This also goes hand in hand with how the parallax effect works, to make it not as nauseating as it would have been.
So UI is one of the most important parts of a game. So first thing the player sees are start screen or the main menu. The player clicks on the play button and they see a select level screen. We have the 4 levels like we mentioned earlier. However, when the player first starts their game, only level 1 will be unlocked for them. They have to complete the previous level to unlock the next level, which makes sense. And um, every time they complete a level, their player progresses. It gains more attack damage. It also gets more health. So the player progresses every level they complete. They gain more attack damage, so it's easier to kill enemies. And on top of that, we also added health bars for both the enemy and the player. The player health bars in the top left, the screen that'll always be there, just letting the user know that how much health the player's on. And then every time you attack an enemy, their health bar will go down. and we used sliders and different prefabs to code the health bars.
So when the user first opens the game, they'll be greeted by our main menu. Our game is the Fallen Angel. So in our main menu, we have two options, play and quit. If the user clicks quit, they'll exit the game. If they click play, they'll be introduced to the level select. Here they'll be able to select our 4 implemented levels. If they want to play in order, they would obviously click level 1. So if they click on level 1, they'll be transported to the first level. So in the first level, as you can see, the user is able to jump, is able to move around both left and right throughout the world. On the top left, you can see its health bar, and on the top right, you can see the score. The score will increase as the player kills the enemies. Each enemy has its own unique health bar. When the user clicks left mouse button, it will attack the enemies. When it kills all the enemies, it will go on to the second level. This is our second level. As you can see, the player can jump, and jumping is done by clicking spacebar. As the player jumps, it can get onto different obstacles and different platforms, as it is a 2D platformer. As you can see, the animation state changes as the player jumps, as the player attacks. Same thing as for the enemies. As you can see there, we weren't able to get across, but the player can still move around and kill all the enemies. Their objective is to kill all the enemies before their health runs out. Once their health runs out, they will have to restart the game. For this level, we do have a slight bug, as our score doesn't change. This is our third level. This one is based in a Cloud City dungeon, where the user has to get through or platform through the level and not fall down. Here the user is then again greeted with another night enemy, and here the 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 score is working. The enemies here have a cliff detection mode, where they're able to check if they're gonna fall off or not. Each of the levels also have a bunch of background elements which is not interactable, such as the rocks, the the fences, and here is our final level, which is the boss level. Here again, you have to kill all the enemies, but you also have to kill the final boss to complete the game. The final boss is like the Demon King, or the demon, or the king of all, or the king of all the knights, as the knights is one of our major enemies. Here you can see the cliff detection I was talking about, where you can see that the enemies aren't falling off their platforms. Our game uses a lot of aspects of regular platformers where you must platform and jump to be able to kill enemies and continue in the game. Here is our final boss. It is a lot bigger and has much more health, and the player must be able to dodge its attacks by running away and attacking it. The player also gets a bigger damage boost as he continues on the level. As you can see that he is able to defeat the enemy. And that's all, guys. As you can see, after you finish the level, we're back to the main screen, and the player can wish to continue by replaying the levels or quitting.
Now starting off with the code, possibly the most important part of this entire project. This class, Transition Behaviors, is a very important script as it allows us to go from one scene to another, effectively allowing the player to travel from level to level. We have a public field here called enemies defeated. As updated for per field, it allows the player to transition from a level to another level after a certain condition is met. In this case, it is when a certain amount of enemies are defeated. For the first level, there are only 2, then for this, and then subsequently increasing for the later levels. And locking the level selections from the main menu by putting them through a initial play test. Now moving on to player controller. This covers most of the movement of the player. We have initial conditions here, such as walk speed, run speed, airspeed, and jump impulse. This controls the basic attributes of the player, as these are very important for platformer games. In the current move speed, it allows us to return a float value that determines whether a player will be able to move or not, and overall its current movement status. With this hierarchy of if statements and conditionals, we're able to see whether the player is moving, can move, and if it is increasing its movement speed, coming to idle, or unable to move, as such as being hit by an enemy and having its velocity locked. Moving on to detection zones. This is a parent. To two different classes: the flying eye and night, as it allows these two classes to detect different lists using the Unity event listener in their detection zones, as seen by the demo before. Coming back to player controller, we have many methods or functions that allow us to determine the current the current sprite position of the player and its current animations, using animation parameters, which is a custom file with static strings that allow us to interface with the animator in Unity. Allows us to set certain animations as per the player movement, which would be here.